Hi folks! In this video I'm going to create these really fun shoe bags using my Cricut Maker, my Bright Pad, and my EasyPress. Keep watching! The first thing that I've done is use my Cricut Maker to draw my seam allowance and cut out my fabric to the required size. I've also used my Bright Pad to weed my applique.
So I've got my material cut out by the Cricut Maker. I'm using a black and white cotton canvas for the inside of the bag and a teal cotton for the outside. And I've also cut my applique out of Cricut Iron-On. So before I go ahead with the sewing, I always like to apply the applique first. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. On the teal layer, I decided to use a fusible interface because the cotton was a bit light and you could see the pattern of the inside through. So I wanted to eliminate that as much as possible. So I used an interfacing, but it's definitely not necessary. I'm going to warm my fabric before I apply my Cricut Iron-On. That should be enough. Center this up. That should be good. I'm going to start it for 40 seconds, one hand of pressure. I've had the Maker draw all my seam allowance on the opposite side, and I'll explain what I've done with that as I move forward to sewing. I like these shoe bags. I think they're really versatile. They're great for taking your shoes to work in the winter or packing shoes in your suitcase. There we go. That should do it. So I'm going to let this cool. I'll remove my cover sheet and I'll be back to start the sewing process. So my applique is done. I've peeled the carrier layer. I like it. It's very cute. I like the white on teal. It pops. So I'm going to start the sewing process. These bags, shoe bags, are super simple to make. I'm going to turn the fabric good side to good side. I'm going to start with the outside layer. You'll see by the seam allowance that I've drawn in Design Space, you want to sew down both sides and across the bottom. The top line is not intended to be closed, the line across the top. That's only intended to be a fold line for pressing so that we have a nice clean edge when we assemble the bag. I'll show you that again later. So I'm going to go ahead and start sewing the outside of the bag together, and I'll come back and show you the inside because it's a little different to assemble than the outside. Oh, I should have mentioned, when you sew the outside bag, you want to go all the way to the end on top. You don't want to stop at the fold line. Go all the way to the end. And I'll get that sewn up and I'll be back. So I've sewn down the sides, across the bottom, and all the way to the ends. I've trimmed up my seam allowance and I've cut off the corners at the bottom of the bag so that I can get a neater corner when I push it out. There we go. Actually, I'll push that out a little more. I usually use a crochet hook because the end is rounded to push out my corners. I know there's a tool you can purchase also to push your corners out nice and neat. So this is the outside of the bag. We're going to be pressing the top in once we sew together the inside. You'll notice that the inside it's noticeably longer, and the reason for that is once we put it inside of this bag, we're going to be folding it to the outside, a little press, and our drawstring is going to run partially through here. So there's a little difference with how you sew together the outside bag. I think it's a little hard to see on this fabric, but you're going to sew down the side, stop, go to the next line, and sew to the top. So you're going to have an opening right across the top. This is where your drawstring is going to pass through. So I'll show you once it's sewn together. I'll show you again because it'll be easier to see what I've done. So I'm going to go ahead and sew these pieces together, and I'll be back to show them to you. Okay, so I've sewn along the side, across the bottom, and up towards the top. But you should be able to see a little better now what I meant. You're going to sew above this line and below this line, leaving a casing or a track open where we're going to put our drawstring. I hope that explains it a little better. I hope you can see it a little better. So I'm going to trim up my seam allowance and my corners. We're going to insert this part of the bag inside out into the cover bag. But before I do so, I'm going to press everything and get it ready for the next stage. So I won't be long, I'll be back. So I've trimmed up my seam allowance. I've pressed along the top of the outside bag just to make it nice and neat. We're not going to see that edge anyway, but it's nicer to work with. I've kept the inside wrong side out, and I've pressed also towards the outside. I've pressed. You can see where the seams are open so that we can run our drawstring through. So what we're going to do now is insert this into the outside bag, get our corners all the way down into the corner. Actually, I think I'll use a couple of clips to make sure they stay there when I fuss with the top. Okay. This takes a little bit of fussing. That's fine because the result is worthwhile. I'll get that into the corner. And I'm just going to clip it to keep it there while I arrange the top. Get this corner in place. That feels about right. Okay, so I fussed with the corners off camera and straightened everything out. And as you can see, the inside bag is longer on purpose. So what we're going to do now is fold it to the outside so that we get a nice trim at the top of the bag that matches the lining. I have there. There we go. Make sure it's nice and even all the way around. fold it down a little more. Yes, I think so. Okay, so I folded the inside bag to the outside to give it a nice trim. Let's see if I can show you. We have the openings for our cording for our drawstring. So now we're going to sew around the bag on the bottom and again on the top, making sure to avoid the openings for our drawstring, because once we sew them up, we don't want to tear it all apart to let a drawstring pass through. So I'm going to go ahead and sew that, and I'll be back to show it to you. So I've sewn around the bag above and below the channel for my drawstring. I'm going to press this down all nice and flat, trim up my thread overhang, and I'll be back to show you the drawstring. So I've pressed all the top of the bag nice and neat. It looks terrific. It's the inside of the bag. I love it. I love the teal and black and white. I think it's going to go in a hostess basket that I'm making as a gift. I'm going to use this string. I find it a little, or rope, I find it a little fragile, so I'm not going to pin through it. I'm instead going to tie it onto my pin. I'll find one that'll work. And let's find one bigger. Yes, this should work. And I'm just going to push it through and tie it in a knot. Okay, so I've just tied my rope onto my pin. I haven't cut it off the length yet because I want to make sure I don't cut it too short. Just put this aside, and I'm just going to pass it through. There we go. Once we get it started, it'll go through easily. You just push the pin through and pull the fabric back, and just work your way to the other side. You could also close one side and do this as one continuous drawstring. It really depends how you prefer to do it. And we'll bring it through the other side. There we go. We just pull it through the other side and leave whatever length we want. We'll finish that up after, because we're going to continue running a thread through the other side to tie off on both ends. I'll leave that one. Take another length. I'll just put it on my pin, tie it on. There we go. And we'll go back in the opposite direction. There. As we did on the first side. Just push and pull the fabric back, push the pin and pull the fabric. That's all there is to it. Simple. We're near the end. Sometimes you have to fuss a little to get the end out. But once you do, you're all set. There we go. Push it out. And we'll just untie the knot. pull it through a little more so they're about the same length. And we'll just snip these off. Oh, this cord is special. It's even hard to cut through. Okay, so then I'm just going to tie these off in a little knot. And I'll clean them up, clean up the ends. There we go. And about the same length on this side. Pull them nice and tight. And there we go. I need to trim these up, make them nice and neat. Make sure my sides are all nice and neat where I pulled my cords through. And that's it. You have a shoe bag. I think that I'll fill it with goodies when I give it. Makes a fun gift. I hope you enjoyed seeing me make this shoe bag. I hope that you'll make some shoe bags and post pictures. Thank you for watching.